Hello, welcome to another episode of LITE Saturdays with KWADWO and KWESI. In today's lesson, we want to focus on building literacy and numeracy skills across the subjects or the curriculum. We have in times past on this particular series talked about several other things, and this is the fourth in the series where we focus on why do we have to build literacy and numeracy skills across the curriculum. The things that we talked of in the previous episode so that people can link up with the various things that we have studied in this.
All right, so we've been looking at the subject of enabling learning, and we started by asking the question why so many kids in our schools actually make slow progress.
Yeah.
And we looked at a number of factors, including literacy and numeracy, as one of the factors that explains the lack of progress or little progress that actually students make. And that also explains the achievement levels of students across schools. We moved on to look at what we can do to help students to recall the things that they study. We shared the idea of retrieval practice as one of the key things that any student can use to really remember the things that they learned or studied in school. And that can go a long way in helping improve their performance. We then move on to look at differentiated learning. That oftentimes in schools, learning is delivered to a group without really identifying the individual learner need and designing instruction in such a way that it ensures that every child is able to learn and make progress. As Edu Transform, we believe that every child deserves meaningful learning always in every class. And that will happen if teachers are very deliberate in designing learning that takes account of the individual differences, learning differences of students. So that's why we looked at differentiated learning. And today we want to tackle one of the biggest challenges that affects students' progress in their learning, and that is the literacy and numeracy skills that are so essential in helping students to access the curriculum fully.
All right. Thank you very much for that brief summary of the things we have done so far. So that brings us to today's agenda. In today's case, we want to focus on literacy and numeracy skills across the subjects. Our agenda is going to be on why we need to incorporate numeracy skills and literacy skills in all subjects. There's always a tendency for people to think that the numeracy teacher or the math teacher teaches math, the language teacher or the English teacher teaches English. For me, the social studies teacher or the BT teacher or the chemistry teacher, it is not in my place to teach you literacy. My place will come in to teach you the numeracy. And I don't have the teacher who is responsible for the subject we call English or math has to teach you that, and when you come to my class, I just use it for my lessons. And so we want to look at why do we need literacy and numeracy skills across all subjects. Then also we'll look at the key skills and strategies that we need to have. That's the literacy and numeracy skills that we need to have in every subject. And then finally, we'll look at how to build literacy and numeracy skills in the subject. Knowing the strategies and not knowing how to build it in your subject will not result in the key things that we hope to see today. But see, why is it so imperative now to build literacy and numeracy skills across all subjects? Why is it so essential to do this?
All right, somebody have said that learning power comprises both literacy and numeracy. And,
okay.
It's not just either of them, but for both you need both literacy and numeracy skill. It's so fundamental to learning and to making progress. And if you look into Ghana's education landscape, literacy and numeracy explain students' achievement. I mean, from the early years of a child's schooling to even the tertiary level, it does explain why a lot of students within the country, even though goes to school, are not able to progress seamlessly from primary education to secondary, even to the tertiary level. So if you look at the statistics from the World Bank World Development Report, it clearly tells us that students in class 2 or grade 2, a greater number of them could not read even a single word of a short text. And the Ghana statistics is there. We're talking about an 80+% of students in Ghana in class 2 of grade not able to read a single word of a short text. And then if we can look at the numeracy aspect of it, we're looking at 60+% of them cannot even add or subtract, sorry, do two-digit subtraction in most of the Ghanaian schools that we have. This problem moves on even to the secondary school. And if we look at the performance of students in both maths and science from 2016 to 2020, using the WAEC data, you could clearly see that progressions in maths and numeracy in terms of passes is something that needs all of us attention. And that explains why a lot of kids, especially after secondary school, are not able to access the tertiary education. And that is not surprising why 17.23% are able to access tertiary education in the country. So tertiary enrollment, gross tertiary enrollment is that low. And I think the current government's vision is to raise it to about 40%. But it tells you that literacy and numeracy skill sets are very key, even in assessing curriculum and progressing in your learning throughout your schooling. But it goes beyond that. It even defines your future productivity. If you look at the recent data on the Human Capital Index by the World Bank report, this composite development indicator was actually first published in 2000 and tells us something about the quality of learning and the quality of education that students experience in this country. So if you look at the data, it clearly tells us that 44%, newborn babies, kids in this country, can realize about 44% of their productive ability and quality, even though they are 95% likely to leave, they are most likely to lose about 56% of their potential, right? And this is blamed on the quality of learning that happens in our classroom across the country, right? And if you compare that to the Sub-Saharan African data, as you can see on the diagram on your right, you'll see that yes, Ghana's average, even though low, is still higher than some of our neighboring countries. Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria are getting 36, 39%. Even Tanzania, Guinea is about 3.8%. So this is blame on the quality of education. And the World Bank's report suggests that it's important that in Ghana, we spend a great amount of time improving the quality of learning in our schools. They suggest that we invest more in teacher quality, right? That kind of learning materials, the innovations of teachers in terms of how they deliver learning. They should use more highly effective instructional practices. And we feel proud with EduTransform that that's what we're seeking to help educators in Ghana to really be aware of high quality or highly effective instructional practices so that they can enable learning for their students within the Ghanaian context and in Africa as a whole. So we believe in working with educators to create classrooms that work. So according to this report, our classrooms are not working in terms of delivering quality education that really will make our students or our learners have the literacy, numeracy, digital skills so that they can be able to perform and contribute meaningfully in our knowledge-based economy. And that is something that calls for a concern. So even if you look at literacy as a subject or as a skill, you can see that it's very important across the subject area because in every subject, students are supposed to make meaning out of the things that they are being taught. They cannot do that if they cannot comprehend the text. And reading is important because it enables students to be able to discover things beyond their immediate sources, right? So you should be able to look for information from different sources and see even patterns and connections that exist between them, ideas and concepts. You can't do this without literacy. So literacy supports learning. All the vocabulary, the expressions, the organizational control that students need to cope with the cognitive demands of any subject, whether it be in literacy itself, whether it be in mathematics itself, whether it be in technical skills, life skills, science subject, humanity subject. You need literacy skills to do that. And in all these subject areas, students are required to write. There is some written assessment. There are some tasks that they have to write to demonstrate their learning, and that is literacy in that sense. So all the written questions would demand the development of thinking skills and inquiry ability. And these are all literacy skills that students need to build within the subject. So you cannot just teach your science or teach your economics, humanities subject or general arts subject or the visual arts subject and think that literacy and numeracy has no relevance to what you are doing. Yes, your subject content is important. The students have to learn it. But even if they can assess it and they can respond to you that they have understood what you are just taught them, they need literacy skills. They need some numeracy abilities to be able to do that. And numeracy matters. When we talk about numeracy, we are talking about the act of putting numbers to things, assigning amounts to a variable in order to make decisions, quantifying things, seeing patterns and trends in variables that you are examining, right? And numeracy is so key because it's been discovered that a lot of people that do manual jobs, like in Ghana, typically, I can think about people that carry mortar, people that do the heavy work, head porters, as such work do not require numeracy and literacy, high levels of skill. And you can see that a lot of people with low levels of literacy and numeracy skills find themselves in those kinds of jobs. And if you look at that compared to the highly paid jobs, you will realize that it needs a lot of numeracy and literacy skills. And this one is not just going to school, or even if you are selling at KJTR or Makula or wherever you sell it, you need numeracy to be able to be a good entrepreneur, to be able to be a good trader, to make profit, to sell to make profit. You cannot say that without numeracy you will be successful. Even the driver's mate needs a good understanding of numeracy. Can you imagine the tractor driver's mate who cannot understand fully the denominations of funds and be able to change appropriately to people? Then at the end of the day, you realize that he will be causing a lot of revenue losses to his partner, the driver, by going on several trips but will not have any amount of money to show. So you see, numeracy is so key to not just doing well in school, but also doing well in life, right? And these two skill sets are so relevant in enable anyone, whichever your level of education or whatever profession that you find yourself in. Your effectiveness, all right, depends on how well you have these skill sets. And that was what I was pointing to. People with poor numeracy skills plus poor literacy are mostly found in manual occupations. So it means that if you even want to increase your economic value without these skill sets, right? And literacy is not just speaking English. Literacy is we're talking about reading, writing, speaking, listening, and it can be in any language, right? Having that skill set, being able to comprehend, being able to think critically. Those are the things that we're talking about, and they are so relevant in our everyday living and existence in terms of the work we do to even earn a living. Your literacy is so key, and that's why I was given, real examples in the Ghanaian context that even those kinds of jobs will require that you have some level of numeracy. Right? So, and you should be able to remember for even the driver's mate. Several people will give money to this person, right? Different amounts.
And they do that so amazingly.
Yes.
Most of them, yeah.
They have to process the location that this person will alight from the bus, and then determine how much change that they need to give to the person based on
how much the person paid.
How much the person paid, and based on the fare, how much he or she needs to be given as a change. And being able to do this, these are all memory works that you should be able to process quickly, and you should be able to give. And if you don't have these skill sets, you cannot even be qualified for anyone to engage you for that kind of job. You see. So we need to look at that. That literacy is relevant for life, and is relevant for your progression, especially in learning and in school as well.
That was a very good explanation for why we need literacy and numeracy skills, and with the practical examples of the fact that they are skills needed for life in every sphere of the economic activities that we find ourselves doing. And that's why I sometimes realize that for teachers who tend to think that their literacy or numeracy skills need to be taught by other subjects, their students don't tend to do well in their own subjects because they need the literacy skills to do the other subjects. They need the numeracy skills to also do the other subjects. And if you expect that the students just carry it from other subjects, then definitely you're going to have problems in your own students having high achievements in the subject because the skills need to be applied, but you need to also reinforce it in your subject. Now, what is literacy and numeracy skills then?
Look at the literacy skills. So with literacy skills, we're looking at word level and text level skills. When I talk about word level skills, in every subject, there are a set of specific technical vocabulary or language of that subject. So I more of an economic geography person, right? So you hear words like demand in economic, supply, which is a common thing that people know. You hear things like interest rate, inflation. These are technical vocabularies that students need to comprehend. They need to know what they mean, and that they are concepts. They have a body of knowledge that are embedded in these words that student needs to appreciate. Right. So that is one level of skills that we need to look out for. And it's meaning, vocabulary, meaning, and reading is all the skill sets that you are looking at under the word level text, and that applies in every subject, whether it's even the English language itself or it's Ghanaian language. There are technical vocabularies that you need to know. The phonics in the English language, and there is phonics in the Ghanaian language as well. So every subject, whether it's vocational, technical, whichever subject you're doing, there are technical vocabularies that goes, and that is the language of the subject. And for you to speak like an economist, as a mathematician, as a scientist, a chemist, there are language. There is a vocabulary that you need to be able to use to talk like that. And then you have the word, the text level skills. And that is where the writing comes in, okay? The reading and the writing aspects of it. So maybe definitions, formulas, there are diagrams, there are tables that you need to be able to comprehend and write about and make a justification for. Those are also the aspects of literacy skills that are passed across any subject and every subject, not just numeracy. And if it comes to numeracy, in terms of skill set, one that I want to emphasize here is data processing and identifying or describing patterns in data. And that is one that a lot of students really struggle with, right? So, for example, if you see a line graph, and these are very relevant, these are financial diagrams that you see there. And students, if they are buying, they've grown up, they are investing in bonds and shares, and they want to see how their shares and bonds are doing. If they have some equity, they need to have at least some basic numeracy to be able to appreciate that. If they are doing a business of their own, you certainly will need some basic numeracy to be able to run that business more effectively. Somebody has said that if you cannot measure, then you cannot manage it. so it tells you that even to be an effective manager, you need that level of numeracy, being able to quantify things, process that data, and seeing a pattern in it, making that data tells a story. It's something that professionals do. They don't have to be mathematicians to be able to do that. Their work will require them to do that. And these are skill sets that we need to see them as life skills that we need to help our students develop.
I see. That really is heavy. These skills are skills that applies to every sphere of life in the things that we need to do. And so we should not be kidding ourselves in thinking that it's only skills that are needed for academic work, but they are skills needed for life. That's what I get from the explanation you just gave. All right. Now, how do I develop these skills then? If I'm a teacher, and let's focus on the fact that it is a life skill now, how do I develop such wonderful life skills?
All right, so we're going to spend a lot of time here, but it's so easy to develop these skill sets. And there are tons of teaching strategies that actually we can use to help teachers in any subject area develop literacy and numeracy skills for their learners. Yes, the literacy teachers, the numeracy teachers, the math and English teachers are already developing these skills in their subject area. But both the math teacher and the English teacher also have to, in addition to developing their curriculum, to develop the other skill as well. So the math teacher should develop literacy skills. And then the English teacher should also learn to develop numeracy skills in English. The question is, you might be wondering, how do I do this? Right, and that is the aspect that I think we will have a lot more thorough discussions on to really address. And this is one of the skills. We want to start with the numeracy one. So this is one of the things that you.
The literacy one, you say.
The literacy one, yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you can do, we said at the word level text, all the technical words the student needs to understand in your subject area. So the word level text skill strategies that you can use for that. And one of it is like having a word wall, right? So if teachers find difficult doing displays, wall displays, but you can have A to Z on your wall, and any word that comes out, which is a technical, a terminology in your subject area, you can actually put that under one of the alphabet. If it starts with K, you put it under K. If it starts with L, you put it under L, right?
Okay.
And every lesson, you need to try and bring out the relevant terms that are relevant in terms of that are going to be used in the current lesson. So you write the words on a piece of cards, for example, and in each lesson, select the keywords that are relevant for that lesson, and then display them next to each other so that the students are aware that as far as this lesson is concerned, these are 3, 4, 5 keywords that we are going to use in this lesson, right?
So if I get you, this is irrespective of the fact that I'm doing mathematics, I'm doing science, I'm doing social studies. Whatever subject I'm doing, the keywords that I have, I'm grouping them under each of the letters of the alphabet. And so in the other subject I come, if I have another keyword and it falls under the letter M, then I bring it under the letter M so that the students will constantly refer to that wall of words.
Yeah. So the idea is that once you display these words, selected words that are relevant to the current lesson. So for example, you are dealing with statistics in numeracy, because the math teachers might think that literacy is not relevant to them. But you are dealing with statistics. You are teaching students how to measure or calculate the mean, find the mode, and the median, right? So these are 3 keywords that you will use often in the text. So you display them. You can write this on the board. If you don't have the resources to do a word wall, like you've seen in the slide over there, you can write these relevant keywords on the board.
Okay.
And the technique here is that anytime you use the word in context, pause and bring the class attention to it.
Okay.
Right? So the first time you pause and bring the attention to it, and explore the meaning of that word. Okay, the mean. Anytime you use the word mean. If you want to calculate the mean, do this, that. Then once you give that instruction, then remind them, we just use one of the keywords on the board, mean. Can anybody attempt a definition, what it means to them? Say what it means to them, so you get a chance to teach that word, what it means. And you can ask the students to use that word to form a sentence, right? That is another strategy that you can use, right? So that is, anytime the word comes up, use in context, use that opportunity to remind the students about that word and to bring out the meaning of that word to the student clearly. So you use that as a check anytime the word comes up. Another thing that you can do is that if instead of maybe writing the words on the board, you are giving students homework as a worksheet. And some of these words, like we're still staying, I want to stay with the mass, the mean, the median, and the mode. What you do is that you need to bold in the keywords anytime it comes up on the worksheet.
Okay.
Okay, so if you are giving students some photocopy material and there are keywords on those photocopy materials or worksheet, you need to be deliberate and bolding all the keywords because you want that thing to register always in the kid's mind. So when they are reading it in context, they are going to see mean, they're going to see median, they're going to see mode. So you've already discussed the meaning of these words, so the students know that these are keywords, right? So it has to be highlighted or it needs to be written, underlined, so that you can reinforce its use in the text. And you can give students personal workbook in addition to that, in which they'll record all these new words whenever it comes up and write its meaning. That is another one that you can do. In students' notebook or exercise book, they can record all the keywords that come up in the lesson and write the corresponding meaning or the explanation. Or like I said earlier, you can ask them after they've written down the meaning, use that keyword to form a simple sentence that explains the understanding of that keyword, right? Okay. And that is something that we can do. In addition to that, you can ask students to select a word from your word bank and talk about it without using the word, like what we call the taboo. So if you're talking about the mean or the adverbs or adjectives, they can talk about adjectives without using the word adjective.
Yeah.
Okay. And another student will then begin to figure out what exactly what the person is explaining. The one single word that explains that. So the other person might say adjective, or might say a noun, or might say it's an adverb, or a mode, or a median, or a demand, or supply. All those key terminologies in your or mole in chemistry and all of that. Okay, so one person will be describing the word and the other person will be figuring out what the key term is. And that can be a game that you can actually introduce in your class. And these are all ways of teaching the technical vocabulary in your subject area. And that is what we mean by the word text level strategy. Right. So to teach the text level strategies, there is a lot more you can do.
So, KWESI, I just want some clarity here. The very first example that you just gave, they are examples that we can use in developing students' understanding of the words or the keywords and how those keywords can be used and getting them to learn those keywords. And then these other examples that you are showing now are going to help the students now learn how to understand the text or the paragraphs or a passage that they are studying in relation to a new set of area of study. Is that the case?
Exactly, yes.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that clarity. So now let's look at how we develop the students' understanding of text.
All right. So when we talk about text, we need to look at it broadly. Like you said, a paragraph or a written note, right, is text. But text is more. Text can be visual. It can be a portrait for the art student, a sculpture work for the art student. It can be photographs for the geography student when they are doing geographic photo interpretations.
Thanks for that insight also, because we tend to always be narrow in our understanding of text. And we want to see it as just words or sentences put together. But all these other forms are also text. Thanks for that.
Exactly, yeah. So it can be a map for the geography student, a diagram, or even a solved mathematical problem.
Wow. So our math teachers also have tests.
Yes. Their graphs are part of it. Yes, so it can be. So anything that contains information, right, for students or for learners to comprehend, either to analyze it or to complete it. So diagrams, for example, can be the digestive system in biology or the respiratory system in biology. So anything that contains information in your subject area that student needs to extract or glue out that information to comprehend how a process or something is performed is a text. So, and that is what we want to look at. If you want to teach that, there are literacies is embedded with literacy skills, and student needs to be able to process that information. They need literacy skills to do that. So that is why I'm sure by now people now get the idea that if I'm a science teacher, I need to teach some bit of literacy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'll be teaching processes. I'll be teaching causes and effects of things. I'll be looking at classifications of things, and all of that is literacy, even though it's full of scientific knowledge. But the skills that you need to be able to process that scientific knowledge is actually literacy skills. And to help students learn that, then you have to have a broad understanding of text and also the different forms of methods, teaching methods that you actually can use to help students develop that skill set. So there are actually two main ways, and we call those things the directed activities related to text, DAX.
Okay.
These strategies. So I'm going to talk about two main broad categories of DAX instructional practices that teachers can use to help students process text, which we have explained broadly very well, so that it can help with the understanding of the subject content that they are supposed to be exposed to. So the first part is the reconstruction activity. With reconstruction activities, students are required to complete a text. So they are completing the text. Either a segment is deleted and they are supposed to predict what it is and add it, okay? Or they are supposed to just add complete new information to that particular text. And when I say text, I'm looking at diagrams, pictures, photographs, tables, anything that contains information, right? That people need to process. That's what I'm looking at. So
I could have a situation in art class where there's a piece of map or an art piece, and then the teacher creates the scenario that a portion of the art piece is broken off or missing. Draw that missing part to make it whole.
Exactly.
That means I'm completing it.
Yeah, you're completing it.
Wow.
Right. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. So and at times it can also be a prediction, right?
Okay.
So a prediction of the deleted part. So that is the one you talked about is the diagram completion strategy.
Yeah.
So the students will predict the deleted labels on the diagram or the deleted part using text. So when we talk about the text, like you use example, the student might have to draw or come up with to complete the portrait that has been deleted, right? So they have to figure it out what will be the missing information or details. So that is one way of helping students to comprehend that particular portrait in art very well. So you delete a portion of it, and then the students use their text and other diagram sources, all the relevant information about that particular portrait to figure out what the missing part would look like, and then begin to draw and see if they piece it up together, it will really represent the actual portrait. So this is ways of helping students to really go deeper into comprehension of things that they see or they're supposed to read, and then they are supposed to be able to comprehend and process very well. Another one is the text completion. Apart from diagram completion, you can also deal with deleted words, right? And we have fill in the blank spaces. You remember those kinds of assessments?
Yeah.
Okay. So a biology teacher is explaining the, what do you call it, the digestive system and all the process. If I take in a banana right now, what it goes through, the processes that it goes through, if I am eating a banana, what the process I go through, all the organs, all the enzymes or whatever that needs to work on this to make digestion happen. The teacher can actually gives us the diagram completed,
Yes.
but also gives us a text that describes the entire processes and all the various organs and the roles that they perform, but would delete certain portions of it and ask the students to fill in the blank space.
I see this particular one really in line with the one where you talked about the word and then how teachers can build a word wall,
Okay,
where I can take my keywords out of a
exactly.
test and
Exactly.
then give the students a stem, sentence stem, and all those things, and then they bring in the keywords to fill it in based on the understanding they have developed.
Yes. So that is the very lower aspect of it, just filling in
Okay.
the keywords. But you can also take away very relevant sentences that
Okay.
if you miss out of
It will
the
make sense.
whole thing, it will make sense. All right.
Yeah.
Or phrases,
Yeah.
right? That needs to be there. That must be always be there. You can pick out those things. So you can pick out words, you can delete sentences, delete phrases, and then ask students to fill in the gap. If you've explained the process, they understood it clearly, then by giving them a text that describes how digestion happens and taking out the key phrases and the key words or sentences, you can actually then ask students to complete that process. And that will help you to appreciate whether they have fully comprehended how digestion actually works within the human body and the organs that actually works and all the things that are involved in that process very well. So that is one form of even assessing the student. But through this process, you are helping to build literacy in your science subject or any other subject that you teach. Another is the table completion. And
Yeah.
you see, these are reconstruction to reconstruct. So it means that the whole is there, but it's not complete. So
Yeah.
you're always supposed to complete. So the third strategy is to also complete the table. And again, a part of it will be deleted, and then the student will be required to complete the key information. And at times it can be classifications of things. So uh, examples of living and non-living things, right? And you have a table of living and living as the subcategories, the categories, and then you have several examples around the table that students can complete it. So you inserted a few of them, and then you ask students to fill in the blank space with the key phrases or key terms or the examples of living and non-living things, and then the tables are completed. These are things
Okay.
that teachers do, but I think they don't really see that as a way of helping students to develop
Build
literacy.
their literacy skills.
And the problem is that instead of using it for learning, they use it as an assessment.
Yeah, yeah, that's the main thing I also see.
Yeah.
That is normally these things I was just in my mind just saying I see this used a number of times, but mainly to assess the students,
Assess the
but not
student.
as a learning strategy for the whole instruction.
Exactly. So that is the mind shift and the practice shift that I think is required here. These things should be seen as ways of really developing literacy. So use it as a learning activity instead of an assessment tool.
Mm.
Right. And another one is completion activities with disordered text.
Yes.
So it can be a poem. It be the digestive system that we just talked
And the
about.
sequence is messed up. You have to rearrange them.
Exactly. The sequences are messed up, and the students have to be able to predict the logical order for these sequences so that when they read a text, it can make sense. So at times, the strategy, we call it a text sequencing. You can just cut them into pieces with several parts of it, and the students are now required to piece it together so that when they read, the text will make
But come to think of it, KWESI, I can easily see a higher order learning approach for learners if instead of instructing them on the sequence, I get the students to actually work together on this and arrange the sequence.
Exactly.
And then we evaluate how well they were able to do it. That will stretch them.
That will stretch them, because you can imagine teaching the digestive system process. What happens within my body when I eat, while I'm taking, and then the teacher has all the information, right? That shows what will happen to the food as it travels through my body. But instead of just telling the students, this will happen to show that you are really knowledgeable in science and in biology, you can actually write this process down, cut it up into pieces, and let students work in pairs, and then restructure in such a way that it will make meaning to them. And that is learning. Learning is happening. And because when you do it, that's why the emphasis earlier you brought is very important. That we should do these as learning activities, not as assessment tools. We shouldn't use it as an assessment activity only, but mainly as a learning activity. And when we use it that way, then we can develop students' thinking skills, which is relevant to their literacy ability. And we can help our students to really process information very well. An information processing skill is really a literacy skill. It is a thinking skill, but it is also a literacy skill, which is very important for students to be able to assess the curriculum fully. So that is something that teachers can use on a number of things, because we are teaching processes all throughout in most of our subjects. How to do this, how to write an essay, how to do that. So if you have an idea of the process, why not use text sequencing to really help students to struggle with it, to see how many of them were able to get it right. And then when you come in to really bring out the details in terms of presenting the facts and explaining them, they are now going to come with a lot of, we should have. That learning is memorable. That learning is different, and it cannot be easily be forgotten because the student did it by themselves. And through your explanation, they're able to discover their errors and correct themselves through that. And when they record that as notes into their notebook, it is a learning that has already stuck in the long-term memory because of these approaches that you use. Okay, so, and the same thing happens even in math teachers. If they want to build literacy, they can solve a problem. Right, and cut it up into pieces in disorder function and ask students to piece it together for that problem to make sense and to make.
I remember I had an example somewhere in one of the years of my teaching where the preamble was that the child in trying to solve it has gotten oil or something poured onto his work, and that you are to figure out in which sequence the work needs to come so that the part that the oil has prevented you from seeing, you can now see it in that sequence. And it was a very beautiful activity for the students to figure it out, that this sequence should come before this one and all that. And I think it's a very creative way of getting students to think of the processes in a math lesson especially, so that you don't spend all your time teaching the steps they have to go through. They figure it out, they reconstruct it. So I like reconstructing activities here.
So the last one is a prediction and the reconstruction. So people will predict the next part of the text with sequence presented, segments presented in sequence. So instead of just deleting parts, you can just write the text and let them complete the text by predicting what is next, right? And these are So again, with a digestive system, instead of giving them everything, you start maybe the first process, you leave the second step, the third, the fourth step, all the odd ones out, and let them find the even steps involved, predicting it. So once you give the first one, the second one, the student will predict it. The third one is given, the student now completes by filling in. This will require a lot of thinking,
Yes.
okay, from students. And that is how learning happens. Learning happens when students learn to think well, and they see errors in their learning, and they make the needed adjustment so that they take ownership of their own learning and development. And the teacher then becomes an activator of it, not just a facilitator of that learning. So the second strategy here is the analysis activity that we can also use to develop literacy skills. And over here, we're talking about text marking, labeling, and recording. Okay, and this is where close reading comes in. So it could be a diagram, like we've said already, that text is diagrams, photos, anything that contains information, not just words. Okay, so underlining, highlighting is one strategy that we can help students to use to really comprehend the key aspects of the text. So people will search for specific target words or phrases that relates to one aspect of the content. As for example, words or expressions or sentences that support a particular view or a particular content or process. And then they will...
Which words in the passage suggest that the character was angry?
Exactly. So
and then you look through the text and find that and highlight it.
Yes. So literacy, they will always say that look for evidence in the text.
Yes, yeah. That's how they do it.
So the same thing, the science teacher can do that. You give students, instead of spending the whole time copying notes, you can give the notes to the students and then be guided questions about segments of information or phrases or sentences or keywords that support or explain a particular process that you're about in it, right? So give the notes ahead of time and then use the class time, not for copying notes, but the class time to really discussing it and analyzing it. And students can use underlining and highlighting as a way, and not just underline keywords, but actually leading them with questions that they could highlight or underline words that explains a key learning moment or an objective, whether it's a process of digestion as we've been using through this example, or how to calculate the mean or finding the mode of a text by reading it of a set of numbers by reading the text. All right, so labeling is one aspect of it. So we can give students, again, text. I keep reminding us that it's photos, diagrams, tables, and not just words alone. So you can ask students to also label. Instead of just highlighting, they can also label a segment of the text that deals with specific aspects of the content that the students are learning. So example is labeling a scientific account with labels provided by the teacher, like predictions, the conclusions. So if you perform an experiment and there's a write-up of that experiment process, students are supposed to identify which aspects of that text is the conclusion of that experiment or the evidence, the findings of that experiment report. So you can ask students to write a report, but you can also equally write a report, perform the experiment, and ask them to figure out what the possible conclusions or evidence or what the hypothesis really was about. And then students, by reading the text, can actually come up with labeling them with the key aspects of it. And the same thing can happen with the digestive system, labeling the key aspects of the processes that are involved with the digestive. Segmenting is one of the ways of analysis. And over here, students can group the text into specific units, categorizing them under specific units. So a typical example that you can think about here is that if you have a text on the different types of demand, okay, students can then group what they read under whether it's an individual demand, whether it's a market demand based on what they have read. They will be able to categorize or structure the information under the various aspects, like let's say individual demand or the market demand. Okay.
If I can come in here, because we said this is also pictures, it could be diagrams, it could be graphs.
Yeah.
I can have pictures of different organisms.
Yeah.
And then looking at the features of what makes this organism an arachnid, or whether there is a centipede, whatever it is, the various classifications that we are looking at. You could just look at the pictures, look at the features that they have, and then classify them based on, and that would be segmenting.
Yes, so those are ways of segmenting the information. So whenever you have a given text, whether it's a photo, like you said, a diagram, in order to make meaning of it, if there are broad categories in there, you can actually group these information under the broad category, being guided with a set criteria of maybe properties like you talked about, or its features, and then use that to segment the text, paragraphs, or photos or diagrams under specific units or label or categories, right? The other type of analysis work is a diagrammatic representation. And this is where students actually construct diagrams from a text. Okay, so we use the digestive system as one example, describing the process what happens to food when you eat it. So instead of writing with words, the process from beginning to the end, you can use the flow diagram or a flow chart to show what will happen to the food from the beginning to the end, with a little bit of text added to it. Okay.
So something like a flow chart.
Yes, a flow chart. Okay. Or concept maps. You can even use concept maps. So here is more using graphic organizers to summarize and to make the information visible to you. So
the text, which is in the form of written letters and words and sentences, I'll reconstruct it using diagrams. Is that the case in this case?
Exactly. So, for example, the parts of a story, instead of maybe the story is written, so if you want to come up with a parts of it, then you can use a graphic organizer for that. To look at the settings, the climax, or the beginning, the end, the middle part of the story. You can then use a diagram to really summarize what the beginning of it, the middle part of it, and then the ending part of the story, right? Or like I was going to go to my subject area in economics. If you want to look at, for example, if government is increasing taxes, the effect of that on economic growth, for instance. You can use a diagram to show, a flow chart to show what will happen. That if government increase taxes, for instance, it means that it reduces people's disposable income. So you draw a diagram to show that. And then another line to show what will happen if people's disposable income fall. They will buy less. So overall, aggregate demand will fall, and if aggregate demand fall, it means that the demand for goods and services, there will be low supply, there will be contraction in supply, and that will lead to a fall in output. So a student can write this whole thing as a paragraph, but he can also present it in a diagram form, in a consequent map form, so that it will be easy for that student to really remember and comprehend that information. So a number of things that comes to students as text in words or in diagrams it is better that we give students opportunity to reconstruct that from the current form to a different form, like a diagram. So if it is words, convert it into diagram, right? And if it is diagrams, let them convert it into words. So, and transforming text from one form to the other is a very important skill that helps with students' processing and comprehension of that text and really appreciating it broadly. And there are clear evidence that that way of learning really helps students to process information well and to learn and also to improve upon their performance and achievement as well.
Okay.
So the last one with analysis here is a tabular representation. All right. So like I talked about the diagrammatic form, if you have a word, a text in the form of words, transform it into what do you call it? Diagrams, flowcharts, concept maps, mind maps. It helps the students to really appreciate that information well. If you have information or text in the form of table, right, then it's important to extract that information, okay, from that text, from that table. And you can also represent them in a tabular form as well. You can also represent the text in a tabular form. So if you have a written text, for example, differences between things.
Okay.
We'll look at the numeracy aspect of it. If you have differences between things, and there are, in every subject area, there are a number of things that the student needs to know that this differs from that because of its features or characteristics or properties. So if you want to distinguish between two things, you can use a t-chart, right? To a tabular t-chart to just simply show that this one differs from this. And that is a tabular representation. So instead of using words to describe that supply is different from demand, you can actually use a table to show what a clear distinctions exist between the two concepts. All right. So that is one way of describing the difference. So when it comes to literacy, with a word text level strategy, it is important that we know the kind of text also, the purpose of the text that we're dealing with. In most subject areas, students are required to do explanation, analysis, discussions, evaluation. Our students might be dealing with informational text, or they are supposed to write persuasive text, or to write text that requires information or narrations, recount. Each of these major forms of text, okay, has their own structure.
Yes.
And the kinds of sentences that are required. Okay, so if you are teaching literature, for example, where students are required to do a lot of evaluation, but your students cannot distinguish between evaluative write-up and an explanation write-up, then it means that you are preparing the student for failure, is that not? All right.
That's going to be disastrous for you, the teacher, and your students.
Exactly. So when you say students should evaluate, when you're assessing them and you ask them to evaluate, but your students cannot write an evaluative text response, and they cannot even, if you give them an evaluative text, they cannot distinguish an evaluative text from an a recount, then you are going to have a bit of a difficulty, a challenge. You get that? So it's important that we expose students to that. If you're, for example, in economics A level, most of the questions are discuss, explain, discuss, explain. So I can teach all the content to my students, but if they cannot write explanation text, if they cannot write discussions, responses in discussion form, and they cannot even distinguish between a discussion text and an explanation text, then it means that they are likely not going to do well finally in the assessment. And that is something that teachers need to know, that in their assessment of their subject area, what kind of text structure is required? Is it an analysis? Is it just informational? Is it just a recount, a description? Students have to be prepared through the everyday lessons on these different forms of text and how they vary from each other in terms of their structure, in terms of the language requirement for each of these texts, so that when they go through an assessment, they can equally be comfortable in responding to them. So they know that this is an explanation. When I write it this way, I'm explaining. When I write it this way, I'm discussing. When I write it this way, I'm analyzing. When I write it this way, is an evaluation. Or this, our assessment requires just informational text. So this is how I should write an informational text. Or this is how I should write a recount. So this is not something that happens only in English language, but in all subject areas. Are students going to be asked to state? Are they going to be asked to explain, to describe? Then how do you write a description? How do you write a discussion? You have to teach that as part of teaching the content. And at times you yourself have to write the essays in your subject area for students to really know that this is an evaluative text, or it varies from an explanation text.
Or this is an exemplar to what an evaluative test looks like.
Right. So one way to get exemplars is use your students' written responses, written tasks. Right? The ones that are very good, you need to archive them. So that when you're teaching students, you're preparing your students, especially in writing in your subject area that requires explanation, you can use that as a guide, that when the question asks you to explain, this is how you should write it. This is the structure of it. This is the conventions that you should follow. And this is the kinds of sentences that should go in your write-up when you are writing an explanatory task. And a discussion task should look like this. So those kinds of distinctions are very important in helping students go through that. So numeracy is also very key, as we've talked about that. And you can use numeracy tools in your subject area as learning tools to help your students appreciate those concepts. So we have these universal sets of Venn diagrams, 3-set problems, and 2-set problems. That is how a science teacher can use them to show the relationship that exists between gas, solid, liquid, and gas, or the relationship that should exist between liquid and solids, or gas and solid, and how solid or gas differ from each other. Right? So instead of saying so many words, using this diagram will help students to really appreciate how they are similar and how they vary, right? And not only will it help them to learn your subject, your science subject, but it will help them to appreciate that the Venn diagram concept that a math teacher keeps explaining that the student did not grasp. The students can appreciate that if you can use it as a learning tool here. That when you have a 3-set problem, the center is actually talking about all the numbers or the things that are common to the 3 items that I'm looking at. And this will help the students to appreciate what you call it, the numeracy concepts that the student has been taught in his subject area. And when we use it as a learning tool across the subject, like you can see in this example, or in a Venn diagram, you can do this in a numeracy as well, distinguishing between adjectives and adverbs where they vary and where they are similar. What is common between the two? Is there anything that is common between the two? So when you use these math tools in numeracy, in science, in geography, in economics, it helps students to appreciate that these numeracy skills is relevant for learning and for comprehension across the skills. We can also use these numeracy skills even in helping students to assess their own progress in their respective subject areas or skills area, right? So using a divided bar graph, for instance, is one way of helping a student to really compare his skill sets in reading fictions or reading for information or writing within a 2-month period, right? Okay. And if the students can comprehend and interpret this very well, it will help the students to now appreciate that the bar graphs that were taught in the numeracy class can actually be used in my learning to represent key information and to help me to do comparison of 2 different variables or 2 different data that are set of data that I have, so that I can actually see patterns and be able to extract meaningful information from it. So a child can look at this particular data and be able to make meaning that how they are progressing in maths, compare August and December over that 2-month period. How they themselves, even their behavior, how they are being friendly. They can read themselves on the vertical axis, and then all the skill sets on the horizontal axis, comparing using a bar chart to compare a set of data for 2 different months to see the progress that they have made. And this strategy, we call it graphing. So students can actually graph their skill sets and their progression in the subjects that they are studying using a bar graph over a period, and use that as a way to compare the progress they've made or otherwise. These are all examples that can be used. You can use a line graph as well, different line graphs, color-coded, to also show progression over a period within a subject, within a skill area that students are supposed to master. So these are all ways of using numeracy and literacy either to support learning as tools for learning and to help students to appreciate these concepts very well, or literacy as a way of helping students to process information across subject area, and even as learning tool, most especially not as just assessment tools, but as learning tool to help them learn the various subjects and to do well in them.
All right. Thank you, KWESI, for that wonderful exposition on how to develop the literacy skills and numeracy skills. For me, my take is that, or what a key thing I learned from this is that all the examples that you have taught or shared with us today are examples that can actually be incorporated in all subjects. And that's why we call them literacy and numeracy skills across the subjects. And it's not a matter of one subject teacher teaching it and the other person hoping that the students have learned it and that is it. Mm-hmm. Everyone in their subject area is required to develop numeracy and literacy skills in order for the students also all to be able to get the needed understanding of this lifelong skill that we all need for the world of work and the world of life. And that's so wonderful to have. So it's quite important to incorporate literacy and numeracy skills into every lesson that we teach. With lower attaining pupils, a 2-minute discussion or finding the meaning of a word will reinforce the importance of using vocabulary correctly in every subject context. And that is very important for all our learners. And that's the key summary that we want everyone to take. We would like to thank everyone who has been part of us on this wonderful journey of enabling learning. We have a 5th lesson on using formative assessment to improve students' learning and attainment. And that is coming your way very soon. We want you to look out for EduTransform and all our series on enabling learning on all the social media handles. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook and all the various social media handles. And then look out for all the things that we keep doing, because we want to work together with you to transform education in Africa. And I've been privileged to have on my side KWESI, and then we hope to meet you again next time. Thank you for being part of us, and share the things that we do with your colleagues so that they can all together help us transform education in Africa. Thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.